In this devotional, I'm going to share with you 3 thoughts from Mark chapter 12, verses 13 through 17, where I'll ask the question, how should I relate to the state? Mark chapter 12, verses 13 through 17 says, "And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?' But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, 'Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it.' And they brought one. And he said to them, 'Whose likeness and inscription is this?' They said to him, 'Caesar's.' Jesus said to them, 'Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' And they marveled at him." One of the things we need to pay attention to when the different scribes and Pharisees, teachers of the law, are going and asking Jesus questions is that they are constantly trying to trap him. They're constantly trying to get him into trouble. They're trying to trip him up in his words. And Jesus knows this and still engages with them, still talks to them. And in one of these occurrences where folks are trying to give Jesus a hard time, where they're trying to trap him in his words, they come and they ask him one of those great questions. What should our relationship to the state be? How should we deal with a nation that's ruling over us that is evil? And in answering them, Jesus gives us some really good insight on how we as believers ought to relate to an unbelieving state. So here are 3 thoughts answering the question, how should I relate to the state, from Mark chapter 12, verses 13 through 17. Thought number 1, taxation. So the whole concept is around this idea of taxation, and all my libertarian friends are saying taxation is theft, and all my more liberal friends are saying, well, you got to pay taxes to the state. This is something that's clear throughout all the Bible and that sort of thing. So what is the answer? Are we to pay taxes to a government that cares not for the God whom we serve, or should we be in some sort of rebellion against them? Jesus answers that question by saying that if it belongs to Caesar, give it to Caesar. That is, if the government has the authority to take this from you in tax or whatever, then give them what's theirs. But recognize that God has a say in all of this too. Thought number 2, authority. The question of taxation is really a question of authority. How much in taxes does the government have the authority to take from you? To what degree should we, as Bible-believing people, trust the government when it comes to things like our finances? Jesus answers this question by saying, essentially, that there are spheres of authority, that the Lord has given to the governing authorities a measure of power to do things like tax the populace. We need to recognize that. We also need to recognize that the governing authorities are limited in their power, and that limit is going to depend on where you are in the world, what nations you're in, what states you're in, who the governing authorities are. All of this stuff is something that we have to parse out given our own specific scenarios. We need to understand what authority governing officials have and what authority they infringe upon when they succumb to the temptation of expanding their authority into areas where they don't belong. Thought number 3, hierarchy. The believer, the Christian, knows that there is a hierarchy of authority, that God is over and above any man-made authority that we can imagine, that God utilizes things like the state to bring about his purposes in the world, and that ultimately he will be glorified through the actions of the state, be they good or evil. We recognize as believers that there is a hierarchy of authority, that the state does have some rights to constrict our behavior, but all of that authority that they have is on loan from God. That it is the Lord who gives them this authority over us. And We have to recognize when they overstep their bounds and step into God's authority instead of staying to their own. When we do that, then we will have a better idea of how we ought to relate to the state. These three thoughts come from the assigned reading of Mark chapters 11 and 12. If you'd like to read through the Bible with me, you can do so by subscribing to this channel, by clicking on the link in the description, or by joining the Facebook group Through the Bible, where we are reading the text of Scripture together.